Under the relentless African sun, the earth of Abul cracked beneath the bare feet of children, their laughter rippling through the air like a song carried by the dry winds. The village stood on the edge of the savannah, where ancient baobab trees twisted their gnarled limbs toward the heavens, guardians of secrets older than memory. The smell of smoke from morning fires still lingered, mixing with the sweet aroma of wild tamarind. Life moved as it always had. I didn't. Beko, just 8, climbed higher than ever before. His small fingers gripped the rough bark as his friends cheered below. Joram, his closest companion, called out with playful envy, daring him to touch the sky. Beko laughed, fearless, wild. UPS's foot slipped. The brief silence swallowed the village, broken only by the sickening sound of flesh and bone meeting hardened earth. Gasps eroded. Motors dropped their woven baskets, yams spilling onto the ground. Elder Okanjo, his face to map of age and wisdom, froze mid-step, lips moving in an urgent prayer to the spirits. Fathers rushed forward, ready to lift what they feared was a broken body, but stopped. The boy was mowing. No, he was withstanding. Blood snaked down his leg, pooling around his foot. His knee was torn open, flesh raw and exposed to the dirt, but his face remained still. Not a whine, not the low. Woman whispered, voice trembling like dry leaves in the breeze. He should be screaming. Another shook her head, eyes wide. This is not right. Joram stepped closer, hoary voice cracking. Beko, you don't feel it? Beko looked down at his wound with curiosity, not fear. He wiped the blood with his palm, smearing it across his thigh like war paint. Then he shrugged. I felt nothing. The village held its breath. Elder Okanjo finally approached, his staff digging into the ground with each step. His eyes narrowed as he studied the boy. The elder had seen much: droughts that starved the cattle, illnesses that turned skin to ash, spirits that whispered in the night. Bet never this. The spirits. Okanjo's voice carried the weight of generations. They watched this boy. The ripple of unease spread through the villagers. Pain was not merely suffering here. T was a voice, the message from the ancestors. To feel pain was to be human. To feel nothing. What did that make Beko? Mothers clutched their children closer. Fathers exchanged wary glances. Somewhere, baby cried, breaking the fragile stillness. Even the birds above seemed to pause. Beko, unaware of the storm brewing around him, turned to Joram with a grin. I won the climb, didn't I? But Joram did not smile back. He stepped away, eyes flickering with something that looked like fear. Beko noticed the shift, felt it like a cold breeze in his chest, but he didn't understand why. The villagers dispersed, muttering prayers under their breath. Elder Okanjo stayed behind, staring at the boy as if searching for something hidden beneath his skin. Beko felt the elder's gaze like a weight. For the first time that day, he felt something, no pain, but the sense that his life had changed. Thought he could not yet grasp how. That night, the fire crackled in the village center. Whispers replaced laughter. Women spoke of curses. Men debated whether Beko was chosen or damned. Joram's mother warned him to stay away. He is different now. Joram protested. But he's my friend Dash. She gripped his wrist tightly. Differences bring danger. You will not go near him. Under the stars, Beko lay on a mat beside his mother, Nerima, who traced patterns on his back with her fingers, the ritual of comfort. But her touch was different, lighter, hesitant. You should have cried, my son, she whispered. But I didn't need to, he replied, confused. You should have cried, she repeated, as though trying to convince herself. Beko stared into the dark, questions swirling in his young mind. Was he broken? Or was he special? He did not know that in the days to come, those questions will consume not only HYM, but the entire village. Morning arrived with tension hidden beneath routine. Women fetched water. Pewter eyes darted toward Beko whenever he passed. Men sharpened spears, their conversations hushed. Even the elders gathered under the acacia tree, their voices low and guarded. Joram avoided Beko, breaking his heart more than any wound ever could. "You don't want to race?" Beku asked, hopeful. Joram looked away. "Not today." Beku watched him leave, the lump forming in his throat. He pressed his fingers into his chest, where his heart pounded, but there no pain. Only the ache of something invisible, something he could not touch. By the river, Elder Okanjo stood with his apprentice, Kamwiri. "You saw with your own eyes," Kamwiri said, voice low. "I saw it, but I understand it," Okanjo replied. "The spirits, perhaps, or perhaps something older." Kamwiri frowned. "Older than the spirits?" Okanjo's eyes darkened with memories. Stories from his grandfather, tales whispered only at night about children born different, children who brought fortune ruin. That evening, the sun bled into the horizon. Beku sat alone under the baobab tree, the same tree from which he had fallen. His fingers traced the rough bark, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He remembered his father, Kafaru, who had left the village years August, seeking fortune in the distant lands. Beku barely recalled his face, but he remembered one thing. His father had called him strong. "You will not cry like the other boys," Kafaru had said once. "You will be different. You will be a warrior." The words had made him proud, but now they felt like a curse. The night crept over Abul. The village slept uneasily. Mothers checked on the children twice. Fathers listened for sounds that were not there. And Beku, wide awake beneath the stars, wondered if his father had been right. But deep down he wished, just once, that he had felt something when he hit the ground. Because maybe, just maybe, the pain willed have made him normal. And normal meant he wouldn't be alone. Amelie squeezed the handle of her leather bag, feeling her sweaty fingers slipped over the worn-out material. The trail that led from Nokutu to Abul serpented between dry shrubs and twisted roots, cutting the vast territory marked by hot winds and the bittersweet smell of burned grass. The Tazu Rugio ahead, its barrenly waters promising challenge and danger. But the real weight she carried was not in the tired legs or in her luggage. He lived in his memory, in the last words whispered by Sifundo, his younger brother, before fever and infection took him. "Is it going to hurt a lot for a long time, Amelie?" She never answered. There was no time. His eyes turned into the brightness of life to erase us from Sifundo before any word of comfort could escape his lips. Since that day, she hunted pain and illness as personal enemies, trying to overcome battles she had lost when she mattered most. Each saving child carried the face of Sifundo in his gaze. Each healing was an excuse for what could not be done. But now, the call that had brought her to Abul was different. A boy who didn't feel pain. This did not seem like a common battle. It seemed another thing. The river was treacherous after recent rains. Amelie was unbalanced as the current rose to her thighs, the muddy waters surrounding her skin as invisible fingers. The noise of the branches dragged by the strength of the water reminded her of her brother's moan that last night. She shook her head, amazing her memory like an insistent mosquito. There was no room for weakness. No more. When she reached the other bank, her skirt was heavy and dirty, but she moved on. Abul was waiting for her. The village emerged in the midst of low vegetation, clay huts with straw roofs arranged in a circle. And in the center, the great baobab, its thick roots emerging from the earth as old bones. Children played near the chicken coops, but curious eyes turned as soon as they saw Amelie. Foreigner, even if it didn't come from so far. Strange, even though it is a sister of land. Elder Okanjo was waiting under the shadow of baobab, his rigid stance as if each year of wisdom weighing on his shoulders. "You seek to heal, doctor." His voice was serious, paused. "But maybe this boy doesn't need his medicine. Maybe he needs the protection of the ancestors." Amelie contained the urge to correct the elder. He knew that in places like Abul, beliefs were as concrete as the ground under his feet. Challenging this meant closing doors even before crossing the threshold. She lightly bowed her head, respectful. "The ancestors guide us, elder, and sometimes send us hands to help. Allow me to see the child." He nodded, although his eyes warned that what she would find may not just be a boy. It was something else. Beku was sitting next to his mother, Nerima, who held him as if he was afraid he would dissolve in his arms. But what scared Amelie was not the woman's expression, but the tranquility of the boy. The knee still displayed the open flesh, the wound mixing earth and dry blood. But Mbeko looked at nothing, the eyes like a lake still. There was no tension, there was no frown of eyebrows that every child would show in the face of that type of pain. Amelie knelt slowly, opening her bag, removing herbs and cloth, but her eyes were in it. She touched her wounded leg, applying pressure, cleaning. Normally, that would be the part where the child shouted, or at least cringed. Becca didn't even win. "Do you feel it?" Her voice was low, almost a whisper, as if they fearful something asleep. The boy shook his head without emotion. "It doesn't hurt. Not here." She squeezed lightly to another point in the leg. "Nothing." Amelie's heart squeezed, not by surprise, but by confirmation. I knew that condition. He had read about her in the books that were stacked in the clinical modest in Nokadu. Children who did not feel pain. Some died young people without realizing fatal injuries. Others bite their own tongue until they bleed, or touched ambers unaware that they were being burned alive. But there was something else there. It wasn't just science. It was the village. The way people looked at Mbeku was not just curiosity. It was fear. Amelie felt this in Nerima, in the way the mother's fingers trembled when she touched her son. He felt in the muffled whispers of the neighbors who watched from afar. "Do they think you're different?" Amelie asked softly. Becca hesitated, but nodded. "They say the spirits gave me this body because I'm strong." She noticed that he said that as if he wanted to believe, but something inside him doubted. And she knew it was because every child, at some point, wants to be like the others. Not special, just the same. Amelie took a deep breath. "There is nothing wrong with you, Mbeko. You were special. But in your mind, the phrase was different. You are in danger." When he finished cleaning the wound, he looked back at Elder Okanjo, who remained with his arms crossed, watching everything. There was a challenge in the elder look, but there was also curiosity. "Will he be fine, doctor?" asked Nerima, the fragile voice, almost begging for security that Amelie could not guarantee. "Yes, but I'll need to go back, accompany you for a few days." The answer satisfied her mother, but Amelie knew that behind that yes, she hid a truth that she dare not tell aloud. This child could not be treated like the others, because if he did not feel pain, the world around him would feel for him. While women lit bonfires to prepare the night porridge, and the children ran again, Becca looked at Amelie with eyes that carried questions he could not formulate. She held her small hand, feeling the living pulse there. "I'll help you, little warrior." But the words had bitter taste, because deep down, Amelie feared that battle was already starting to be lost. As it was with Sifundo, and losing another child, she knew, would be a blow from which she might never recover. The night breeze brought the smell of distant rain. Ancestors could be watching, but this time, Amelie swore that he would not let his life drain between his fingers again, even though, for that, it had to challenge one's own gods. Under the suffocating heat of the afternoon in Audible, the leaves of the old acacia swing lazily, projecting trembling shadows on the wheel formed by the elders. The murmur of the low conversations was mixed in the distant corner of birds and the stamp of the wood that fed fires dispersed by the village. Amelie was standing in the center of that circle, her tense face, the heart rapidly. I knew that moment would not just be about Mbeku. It was about overcoming the silence that consumed her since she held the cold body of Sifundo. It was about preventing another child from being swallowed by ignorance and blind belief, even though, for that, it had to hurt the foundations of the tradition that supported that people. Elder Okanjo's voice sounded first, serious as the weight of the decades he carried. "You call this here, doctor? Speak. Say what needs to be said." The other elders nodded in silence, faces marked by deep wrinkles, hard, suspicious looks. Amelie took a deep breath, the words attached to her throat like stones. But she released them because there was no other way. "The boy, Becco, he feels no pain. You all saw it. I examined. It is not the work of the spirits. It is a rare condition. Inside it, on the nerves that take body warnings to the mind, something is wrong. When he gets hurt, he doesn't know. He can bleed to death without realizing it. It may have a high fever and not feel the heat burning your body. This is not protection. This is danger. For a moment, only the wind answered, then low laughs. Not mockery, but unbelief. Elder Safuri, a white, bearded man who stretched out to her chest, squeezed her eyes. You talk about things we don't see. Our parents taught us that pain is the language of ancestors. If the boy feels no pain, it is because the spirits keep him. He is chosen, and the chosen do not die easy. Emily felt the heat go up on the face. Anger, not theirs, but of impotence. She squeezed her hands tightly, remembering the cold sweat on the forehead of Safundo, the moans that left her awake night after night until he no longer moaned. The bitter taste of that loss burned in his tongue. I lost my brother. He felt pain, a lot of pain, and I could do nothing. He asked me for help. I didn't know how to help. I was just a child. But now, I know. You don't understand. This boy, Mbeko, he can smile while dies inside. He can play as the blood dries into him without stopping. You call it a blessing. I call it a curse. Elder Okanjo hit his staff against the cracked land. The sound echoed like a dry thunder. You oppose what we know, Doctor. Our grandparents told us about children like this, rare, invincible warriors. They come in times of change, hunger times of war or healing. We are not afraid of the boy. We feel respect. You ask us to see illness where we see a signal. Emily felt the tension squeeze her chest. Each sentence of the elders was like a wall being erected before it. But she knew there was something beyond the words. Fear. All that respect from Becca had fear. They didn't know what he was. And when people don't know, they protect themselves with beliefs. She changed the tone. The voice lowered, almost a whisper. If Mbeku were your grandson, elder, and he fell if he broke inside and you didn't know if he slept and didn't wake up, would you say the ancestors took him? Or would they say they failed to protect him? Silence. Elder Okanjo looked away for a moment. The question had pierced the surface of the tradition. He knew it was possible. Even the chosen ones could die. Safuri cleared throat. And what do you suggest, Doctor? Let us watch the boy like glass. Let us take it from the field. Let us make you weak. Emily denied his head. No, I want you to teach him that the body speaks, even without pain. Let's look at the blood. May you see the cuts. Learn to hear the silence of the body when it is injured. I don't want him to be weak. I want him to live, so that one day he has grandchildren and tell the stories of this village. The words hovered in the air. The resistance was not gone, but there were cracks. Elder Okanjo supported his handy hands on his staff, his eyes fixed on the earth. You can watch over the boy, teach what you know, but remember, there are things that even your knowledge cannot explain. Spirits will always watch over us, and for him. Emily nodded, although she knew that this was not a victory. It was a truce, but it was enough, at least for now. When the elders began to disperse, Okanjo called her in particular. Doctor, I saw something in his eyes when he talked about his brother, the pain of those who lost. But Mbeka, he's still here. Do not try to save your past in it. Save what is real today. The words hit Emily as blades. He had seen it through her. She held the cry that threatened to escape, could not show weakness. No there, just answered with a yes, elder. But inside it, the storm continued. From afar, Mbeku ran with other children. He looked happy. It seemed normal, but Emily knew just a bad cut was enough. An unnoticed infection, a silent fever, just a slip and that smile would go out. And she refused to see another cold body in her arms. Acacia shadows stretched through the village as the sun descended. Emily knew that the true struggle would not be with the elders. It would be over time, because death did not need the spirit of spirits to enter Abel. She always knew the way, and now she stared at a boy who didn't feel pain. The days dragged on Abel, while Emily remained attentive to every step of Mbeku. The routine of the village followed as always, but to her, everything seemed fragile, as if the boy could simply collapse without warning. The sun punished the mud huts, the children's laughter mingled with the sound of distant drums, and the burnt wood aroma impregnated the air. But behind normality, Emily felt something wrong. Something I couldn't name. She watched Mbeka run between the stones, barefoot, without care. He saw when he stumbled and fell, his knees tearing on the hard earth, and he just got up, shaking the dust as if nothing had happened. He played between spine shrubs, where other children would shout at the slightest scratch, but Mbeka passed them as if his skin was iron. Every fall, every cut, every bruise invisible to him was a silent blow to Emily. Because she knew, the absence of pain made him free, but also condemned him. One afternoon, as the sun was dyeing the sky with orange and purple, Nerima, the boy's mother, asked Emily to accompany him to the Tazu River for the bath. The waters had lowered, revealing moss-covered stones and small puddles where the fish stirred. The wind brought the freshness of the trees, but Emily did not feel alone. She knelt on the bank while Mbeka undressed. The soft light revealed her young body, and that's when she saw the marks. They were no common Joe cuts, nor scratches of the branches he crossed carefully. They were dark, deep scars, tracing patterns that did not belong to childhood. Circular marks, old burns scattered around the back, too symmetrical to be accidental. Linear scars in the arms, as if they had been made with sharp blades, not by chance. Each signal told a story that the boy had not chosen to live. Emily's heart shot. The air seemed heavier, as if the river itself had stopped to hear. The voices of children playing on the other bank became distant, stuffy. She touched the boy's back gently, her fingers walking through those scars that should not be there. Mbeka turned his face, surprised by the break. "Who did this to you, Mbeka?" The question came out low, but loaded with something he didn't understand. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate. Then he looked away at the Barena water, where small tadpoles swam in circles. "It was before we came to Oddball elsewhere, where I lived." Emily felt a chill climb through her spine. The answer explained nothing, but made everything even worse. "And who? Who hurt you?" There was another break. The breeze shook the leaves of the trees, but among them the time seemed stopped. Mbeka squeezed his knees against his chest. "My father, Kifaro, he said it was supposed to be strong. When I didn't cry, he said I was ready to be a warrior." The boy's words were simple, but for Emily, each syllable fell like a blow. The river water seemed to freeze his feet. Kifaro, she had heard the name once, in a murmur among the women of the village. The man who had left everything behind, like a ghost. But now that name carried another weight. It was not just the absent father. It was the man who had tortured his own son. She held Mbeka's arm softly, but firmly. Her heart was hitting so fast that she feared he would hear. "And you never told that to anyone?" Mbeka shook his head. He said it was right, that the warriors don't cry, that the world is hard. And I had to be harder than the world. The words came out with the innocence of a child who did not understand that it had been broken before it even increased. Emily felt her eyes burning, but contained the tears. At that moment, she understood that the pain that Mbeka did not feel outside had been replaced by an invisible pain, a pain that no one saw, a pain that made him believe that what he lived was normal. Emily remembered Sifundo, his brother, moaning on the dark night, holding his infected leg. He remembered how he wished he could take that pain from him, just for a moment. But now, before Mbeka, she saw the other side of that desire. A boy without pain, but it had been destroyed anyway. When they returned to the village, Mbeka looked the same. He ran beside his friends, laughed, climbed into the trees. But Emily only saw the hidden marks under the skin, and with them a new truth. It was not enough to save him from the falls and the cuts. She needed to save him from something much bigger, something he carried since the day his father decided he was no longer a child, but a gun. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The wind hit the walls of the cabin, and the noise of the leaves mingled with the muffled shouts that echoed in his mind. She thought of Kifaro. Where was he now? Did you know that Mbeka had survived? Or would you just have forgotten? Worse, would he one day come back? Emily looked at the door of her cabin, as if expecting that man to come from the shadows at any moment. Fear mingled with anger. It wasn't just a doctor there. It was a sister who had lost a brother. And now, in front of that marked boy, she knew she couldn't fail again. The smell of the wet earth took the air as distant thunder announced that the rain approached. Abel slept, but for Amelie, the battle only started. She had seen the marks. I knew the truth. And now, there was no way to go back. Because Mbeka's past was not buried. He was alive, breathing, and maybe waiting for the right time to return. The night fell on Abel like a dense, suffocating cloak. The fire on the bonfires fluttered, throwing shadows that danced on the cabana's clay walls. The wind carried the smell of burned wood mixed with the dry sweat of hunters returning from the savannah. But Amelie didn't feel the freshness of that breeze. I just felt the weight of what you knew, the name that now hammered in his mind, Kifaru. The man who had shaped Mbeku with iron and fire. The man who had sculpted pain in his son's flesh until he turned him into something he believed to be invincible. A man who had returned. The news had spread in whispers at dusk. Some men had seen him cross the bank of the Tazar River, a tall silhouette, carrying ancient skins over his shoulders and a spear against his chest. His face hardened by time, his heavy presence like a distant thunder. Women departed as he saw him, and men have looked down, out of respect or for fear. Kifaru was not just a hunter. He was a survivor of tribal wars, a man who had knocked down leopards alone and believed weakness was worse than death. Amelie knew he needed to talk to him, but fear accompanied her in every step. His legs were firm, but his heart hesitated. He remembered Sifundo, that last look, the impotence that crushed her as he departed. She couldn't fail with Mbeku, not this time. The firelight illuminated Kifaru, sitting on a log, sharpening the blade of his spear with slow and accurate gestures. His arms were marked by scars, silent stories of battles and survival. The sharpener's metallic sound brushing the blade seemed to cut his own air. Amelie approached, feeling every beat of the heart resonate in the ears. He looked out, stone eyes, hard, impenetrable. You knew about Mbeku. The words came out firmly, but Amelie felt the tremor in her breath. The Kifaru jaw muscles were tensioned. He did not stop sharpening the spear, but there was something dangerous in his silence. Until he responded, his severe voice, hoarse like the roar of an old buffalo. I knew. I saw what he was. I saw that he was different. A boy who does not feel pain is a man who does not fear death. Amelie stepped forward, the heat of the fire warming her face, but the cold inside it increasing. He's not a man. He's a child. Your son. The blade stopped. Kifaru rose. Her height made her feel small, but she didn't go back. His eyes looked like sparks. I made it strong. The world is cruel, doctor. You don't know what I saw. Men being torn by plugs, children killed in invasions while their mothers shouted. Weakness is a disease that kills faster than any fever. Mbeku, he survived because I prepared him. Amelie felt the anger burning in her throat, but the pain was even greater. She saw behind that hardness mask. I saw a feared father. He feared losing. He feared seeing his son buried under the dry earth like so many others. Like Sifundo, you didn't make it strong, Kifaru. You made you believe it is indestructible. But he is not. He could die, and he won't even notice. He can smile as he bleeds until there is nothing left. He can run until the bones break, and he won't know. He needs to know he can get hurt. He needs to know he's human. Kifaru turned his face for a moment. The first crack in your armor. Amelie took advantage. I know what it is to hold back someone you love and feel that you are losing it, and not being able to do anything. I lost my brother. I was holding his hand when he last shouted. I would trade everything so that he had another day, but I didn't have that choice. You have. Mbeku is still here. He is alive, but he needs to be protected, not trained as a warrior. For a moment, the silence involved them. The stamp of firewood on fire was the only sound between them. Kifaru squeezed his fists. The nodes of the fingers clinked. When he spoke, his voice no longer had the rigidity of before. She was broken, weak, human. I just wanted him to live, that nothing broke it, that he was stronger than I was, stronger than the man I buried. Amelie felt her hot tears sprouting her eyes, but refused to drop them. He could be strong, Kifaru, but he needs to be a child first. He needs to know he can fall and get up, feel pain, and be healed. That is to live. It is not surviving. It is living. Kafaru's hand squeezed the spear, but then he released. The iron fell on the dry floor with a deaf thud. He looked at the flames like looking for something in them. Maybe I was reviewing the faces of those who lost. Maybe she was seeing her son's face to live, running, laughing, fragile, but real. His voice came out almost a whisper. I didn't know he was in danger. I thought I was saving him. Amelie approached, placing his hand over his arm. He felt the rigidity of his muscles, but also felt that there was a father there. Lost, desperate, just like her years ago. You can still save it. Just need to let me help. He did not answer immediately, but it didn't have to. Your silence was different. It was no longer the stone silence. It was the silence of whom, for the first time in years, I had heard, in the distance, the howl of a jackal echoed through the savannah. The night was still alive, but in that clearing, between the heat of fire and the weight of difficult truths, something had changed. The battle was not yet overcome, but perhaps for the first time, they wouldn't fight each other. They would fight together, for Mbeku's life. Abele's scorching sun no longer intimidated Mbeku as before, but now he stepped with caution on the dry and cracked floor. Each step, even without pain, was measured carefully. His eyes were constantly coming down to their feet, seeking thorns or cuts. When he found a sharp stone, he did not ignore her. He stopped, watched, deviated. Not because I fell, but because it had learned to see. Beside, Amelie accompanied him, his vigilant look, but less tense than in the early days. The woman no longer saw the boy who didn't feel pain. She saw a boy who was beginning to understand her body. Under the shadow of the great baobab, he sat down and rubbed his hands against his knees covered with new and old marks. Amelie sat next to him. The smell of the sap mixed with the distant aroma of baked meat at the bonfire of the village. The sound of the drums spread throughout the plains, but there, near that sacred tree, everything seemed calmer. Why do you look so much to your hands? Mbeku asked, her curious eyes, but now without the blind innocence she saw the first time she had examined him. Amelie smiled. It was not a forced smile, nor the smile of those who hide behind duty. It was a true smile from someone who, for a moment, felt relief. The hands tell stories, Mbeku. The skin speaks to you. The pain, she is not an enemy. She is a warning, a friend who screams when something is not right. When you don't hear the pain, you need to hear your eyes. You need to see, feel with the look. Mbeku frowned, reflecting for a moment. His fingers touched the rounded scar on the back. One of the burns Kafaru had left. Rather, he saw it as a symbol of strength. Today it was just a brand that would no longer need to repeat itself. I will hear with my eyes, because I want to live. Amelie nodded, but his throat squeezed. The boy's words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had lost. In Mbeku, she saw Sifundo, but for the first time, looking at that boy, she didn't feel guilty. He felt gratitude, because somehow, saving Mbeku did not erase Sifundo, but honored him. A gust of wind shook the leaves of baobab, lifting dust and making the children run through the village, protecting their eyes. Mbeku's laughter mingled with the noise of the wind, echoing light, free. Amelie felt her chest open. That sound, it was not the sound of a warrior forged in pain. It was the sound of a child, a living child, and at that moment she knew she had won. She had saved the boy, and in a way, he had also saved herself. If you enjoyed this video, please help us grow by subscribing to this humble channel. And if you'd like to watch more videos like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch.